This one was frozen shut. I just ran some PB Blaster in there, just soaked it. Soaked both of the latches on both sides and just work it. You need a hammer, the universal tool. Just keep smacking that back and forth while the lubrication works itself in there, and do the same thing here. Don't just do it until it works. Keep going. Voila, it's 1968 all over again. Have you got OCA? I'll bet your wife could tell you. The symptoms are things like you always smell like cleaning solvents and orange gojo. You and your wife go out to a restaurant, you always make her pay so the waiter doesn't have to see your hands. Your idea of a family vacation is taking a 20-foot equipment trailer and a weed whacker with you. Did you just buy $2,000 worth of wheels and tires for the parts car? You have the eternal optimism that makes you drive by every rusty hunk of junk down the road and say, that one's got potential. Your addiction has devolved to the point now where you're out with a group of guys once a week that you have to stand in front of, state your name, and tell them that you've gone 45 days since your last time on Marketplace. Welcome to American Outdoors. So come on, tell me if this isn't true. You drive by that old GTO that's alongside the road, you slow down and you get out, you walk around it, you kick a flat tire, you look through the dusty windows and you take the number down, and then you go home and you just can't stop thinking about it. You talk to your wife, your kids, your buddies, your neighbors, whatever, and then you can't sleep. All night long you're up in bed, you're thinking, I should have called the guy. I should buy it. What if somebody steals it right out from underneath of me? Well, do you remember that faded sign that you could barely read the number off of? Did you happen to look in the upper right-hand corner of the Marketplace listing and notice that it's been for sale for 36 weeks? So I'll get right to it and list the first reason, I think, probably one of the most common mistakes that folks make when they're getting into this hobby, and that's emotional buying. Whether we're getting older, we want to relive the past, we had an old car in high school, our buddy had a car, just reliving the good old times, and all of a sudden there's an opportunity that comes up and we just can't pass it up. And you know, it's funny how it changes our focus, because you never noticed a 75 K20 until you bought a 1975 K20. And now every time you go take it into town, well, there's a square body, there's a square body, there's a square body. So you're heading over to your buddy's house and you drive by this rusted hulk of a 65 GTO and you go find the local car guy and you tell him all about it. He looks at it and he says, no, that's no longer a 65 GTO. It's a mess. It's got no floorboards from the firewall to the back bumper. The frame's been welded up. The VIN tag's got screws instead of rivets. It's something you're way over your skill level with. But do you listen? And you say to yourself, I found it. No, you really didn't. That's what I've wanted my whole life. You probably never gave that kind of car or truck a second thought until right now. Just wait till everybody sees what I bought. You'd be surprised what they're going to be thinking. And for some of you that have been doing this for a while, have you ever noticed that everything that you try to sell, you have to cut somebody a deal, but everything that you want to buy, they're firm on their price? It might be we're not thinking all of our deals through. And if you're looking at old classic cars to buy and sell, well, that's where emotional buying can get dangerous. Because I believe you make all your money up front. So if you buy something that's $2,000, you might be able to turn around and sell it for $3,000 right away. Or you can sink $20,000 into it. Maybe you'll sell it for $22,000, maybe you'll sell it for $25,000, maybe you'll sell it for $15,000 if you're fortunate. I go to a lot of auctions. I go to farm auctions, consignment auctions, estate sales, auto auctions, all kinds. I was at a farm auction the other day and there was a stack of 16-foot metal cattle panels. And these were used. They were rusty. They had weeds that had dried up and vines wrapped all around them. They were bowed. I can get those at a farm store for $32. The guy with the winning bid, he paid $35.
Going twice. Sold!
As soon as the auctioneer had closed the sale, you could hear the murmuring in the crowd from everyone. They knew that he could have paid less, brand new, at the local farm store instead of there. So why did he do that? Well, sometimes it's part of the game, it's part of the thrill, and we let our emotions drive ahead of reason because we just have to have it. So by its very nature, buying an old muscle car or a truck, it's an emotional purchase. Even people that have a lot of money and they simply buy these vehicles as investments, they'll tell you they could make more money if they put it somewhere else. So if you've already done your homework, well then you know what you're looking for and you know what to expect. You know the tendencies of, let's say you're looking for a 68 or a 69 C20 3/4 ton or a K20, a 4x4. You already know what you're looking for. You know what they're known for when it comes to problems. You know what they may cost as far as parts and where to get parts. And you already know what you can do to these vehicles and what you're going to need help or you're going to have to pay to have done. See, if you've already done your homework, you're ahead of the game. A pretty effective tool to limit your impulse buying is to narrow your list of target vehicles. When I was younger, I messed around with just about everything that GM made. I had Chevelles, Camaros, El Caminos, Monte Carlos, Impalas, Caprices, the whole gamut. Well, these days, it's harder and harder to find those kind of cars. And when you do, they're coming at a premium. And parts can be harder to source. Of course, they're more expensive versus something like these old trucks. They're fairly common. Square bodies were made for well over a decade. And it's a lot cheaper to find a C10 parts truck than it is to find a 71 Monte Carlo parts car. And the other thing is too, once you've narrowed that list, you kind of understand where the market is on those. You get really comfortable knowing what a truck is and isn't worth. So for example, if you've got a budget of $10,000 to get a truck back on the road, and you go find one and it's fairly marketed at $6,000, well, that leaves you with about $4,000 to do with what you want. And if it's right at $6,000, you should be able to do that. If you're not familiar with the market, or you just got to have that for pick a reason, and it's worth $3,500, and you still spent that $6,000, well, you just put a big hole in your budget, and you've got to try and make that up. And that's a lose-lose game. You have to be comfortable knowing that you made a fair and honest offer for something that you're interested in. And you have to be willing to walk away if the seller won't accept your offer. However, always leave your number. It is so important for you to do your market research and to have a fixed budget and a structured plan. And to have people who can give you feedback, whether it's your wife or family, friends, local car enthusiasts who are willing to give you an honest opinion and that you're willing to listen to it. A consequence of emotional buying and a lack of forethought is no inspection. You can have a lot of regrets dragging something home and then finding out later on it really wasn't what you wanted. I don't like ticks and chiggers any more than the next guy, but it's pretty important to get that out from under the tree row so you can get under and inspect the frame, make sure the drive shaft's still there, positively match the VIN with the title if there is one. Take a list of specific issues that you're aware of with that model so that you know what to look for once you're there. Number 2 on the list, and that's number 2, is buying the wrong level of project. I can build a chicken coop, a dog house, a lean-to, a little shed, a greenhouse if I have the instructions. I cannot build a house that my wife would want to live in.
Oh, it's marvelous. But where do those steps go?
Steps? Why, those are shelves.
Shelves?
There are four levels of restoration quality vehicles. And I'm not talking about the top tier where somebody just writes a check and they can drive. That's not what this video is about. This video is for somebody that's new to the game and they're on a budget and they want to avoid the mistakes, and I'm trying to share the knowledge of what I've learned while I continue to make those mistakes. But number 1 is driver quality. Number 2 is a partial project. Number 3 is a restoration shell. And number 4 is a parts vehicle. Now, a driver quality vehicle is something that you can drive while you're fixing it up. So it's considered legal, reasonably safe. It may need parts, it may need mechanical repairs, but it'll get you from A to B while you're doing that. The second type is a partial project, and that's something that it might be missing parts, and it may not run, it may not, but it needs a significant level of work over what a driver quality vehicle is. Number 3 is a restoration project. Now, a restoration project could be a shell. It could be a roller. No engine, no transmission, maybe no interior. Something that they're advertising, if it's a truck, it's got no truck bed. It's on blocks, something like that. It's got wiring issues. There are major things going on where it's going to be a bit before you can actually get it on the road. Number 4 is a parts car. Those are ones you might see on YouTube quite a bit, where will it run? Will it drive 700 miles? Yes, there are people that get them running, and I am including it in the list. However, those are the very lower tier, bottom shelf type of restoration, and it's not for the faint of heart. So what a lot of buyers do is they'll jump right into a deal because they think it's a bargain. I mean, hey, it's a 67 Malibu SST. How many are them out there? I don't know how many are still left, but that doesn't mean it's the right car for you. And what a lot of people don't realize when they think they got a deal is, A, they don't really have the money to undertake that large of a project. B, they don't have the experience to do some of the things that are required. C, they don't have the tools that it's going to take to do them properly, and they don't have the time. And so what happens is that little Malibu SS gets pushed back behind the house, out of sight, out of mind. And the problem is trying to match the image that we have in our head with the reality of what it will really look like. I'm not a Debbie Downer, and I hate to wear out old cliches, but sometimes the guy's got to realize what his limitations are. Your intended use should determine the level of restoration. If it's a show truck, well, then originality and detail matter. If it's going to be a weekend cruiser, well, then reliability matters. If it's a work truck, function matters. And if it's going to be a show vehicle, well, then originality and detail and desirability, those are all very important. There's 3 things that tend to make people overlook the obvious when they're looking for the right project. Shiny paint, a wow factor, I guess I could call it. Rarity, and oh my, potential. Potential is where projects go along that tree row to die. Because underneath all that excitement are rust scale, frame rot, rusty floorboards, missing parts, missing VIN tags, and sometimes dishonesty. Many first-time buyers put the focus on the purchase price, not the money that they're going to spend later. And the truth of all this is you're not really keeping most of what you're buying. You're replacing it. And that shiny paint can look nice, but if there's blisters around the rockers and there's body putty that's bubbling up, really, it's no different than if you'd have bought something that was rusty and primered. They're both going to take the same amount of body work and expense. The difference is that the listing price for this one is going to be more. And time. A driver quality restoration may only take a few months if you're just focused on body work and paint. And most of the people working on these have a day job. So it's going to be nights and weekends. And you might think it's going to take you 6 months. More than likely, most restorations, they take years. Most experienced restorers will tell you, once they've figured the purchase price, then they go ahead and they start calculating body work, suspension, wheels, tires, drivetrain, interior, all those sorts of things. And they go, okay, good, got it. And then they double the price. And they write that in pencil.
Can you bless me with something?
For someone new getting into this business, I would suggest the best combination would be a driver quality vehicle plus a parts vehicle. And that gives you the opportunity to drive something, keep your motivation up. You don't have to look at it hiding in the corner of your shop. It's running, you can experience it, know exactly how it's supposed to steer, drive, run, stop, go, all those things. And then have a parts vehicle that you can practice on, learn how things go back together. You can go over here to the parts vehicle and check it out and say, okay, that's how that bolts up. The learning curve is much easier in a situation like that. You learn as you go, and you've got sort of a safety net. Number 3 on the list, and it's just as important as the other 2, is when folks believe that they're going to drive these every day and they're going to make them just as comfortable and efficient as the late model stuff. Now, I get all that. I've got a late model Silverado, and I can understand people saying, well, I don't want anything to do with the right to repair, the ECM, body control modules, tracking, whatever. Okay. But about the only way you're going to get this truck to ride as smooth, be as powerful and as efficient and as safe is to just unbolt the body and put it on a late model Silverado frame. These have no safety features to speak of. There are no shoulder restraints, no airbags, there's no GPS, no Bluetooth, no anti-lock four-wheel disc brakes, no airbags, no cruise control, no air conditioning, no heated seats, no blind spot sensors in my mirrors. I have one mirror. As a matter of fact, this has a standard, a driver's side mirror. There was also a passenger side exterior door lock was also an option. But anyway, I digress. Yes, I drive mine every day. I drive my trucks every day and I enjoy them. However, I live out in the sticks, so I'm not driving every day to a job. And I don't have a family that I'm going to require to get into one of these things and ride around in them all the time. Yes, you can drive these every day. Did I also mention that they don't have the power of a new vehicle? They don't get the fuel mileage of a new vehicle? And who's going to work on these if you don't know how? Trying to find somebody to align these old cars and trucks, to do work on these, it's not like it was in the old days. The new mechanics didn't grow up on drum brakes and MP205 transfer cases and that kind of stuff. This is new to them too. Uncomfortable bench seats, loose steering, no cruise control, that can make for a very tiresome experience for a family driving down the expressway every day in rush hour traffic. So if there's a common thread throughout this video, it's probably denial. So watching this video, I hope has been informative. I'm sure there's things that you disagree with. Be sure and leave those disagreements, your questions, your comments below, because I try to answer everything. Check out some of our other videos that you might agree with more. Anyway, from all of us here at American Outdoors, thanks for watching, folks. We'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.
This concludes our broadcast day. Good night, and God bless America.